Aaron Rodgers is old, he's washed up, and we need a replacement quarterback. I'll take things idiots say for 500, Alex. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom freaking Frackin'. Anybody who says to trade Aaron Rodgers is an imbecile. Grossi. And today, what we are going to peruse, what we're going to take a look at, is if the Packers could potentially find a future quarterback, emphasis on future, as in like long-term future, like in 25 years when Aaron's like, okay, guess I'm done now. We're going to see if we can find them in free agency. And maybe we should sign them to a cheap deal. So there's three guys that I got my eye on in particular. Because listen, the Green Bay Packers don't really have a great history in getting backup quarterbacks. Looking at you, Seneca Wallace, Brett Huntley, Deshaun Kaiser. And now listen, Tim Boyle, Andy Herman, I know you love him. He's fine, but that's how I feel about Tim Boyle. And that we know nothing about him. He played okay in the preseason. Nothing to be like, oh man, we got a contender on the field. And so I think that, as I've been saying for years, since we haven't had a suitable backup since Matt Flynn for the win, that maybe we should go in. And on top of that, who knows? In 3 or 4 years, if Aaron decides, hey, I'm done now, then maybe we got our future guy here. So let's break into this. Let's start off with man numero uno, and that is Teddy Bridgewater. Now, Teddy Bridgewater, the reason that we should sign him, before we even get into looking at any of his stats or his accolades, is he's a former Vikings player, right? He had suffered a catastrophic injury, right? They got let go for cheap and went and signed a quick deal with the Saints. And the fact that if he could come and be successful in the Green Bay Packers, that's all I need to know. I don't even need to look at his stats to know the amount of salt that would be rubbed into the gaping wound of the Minnesota Vikings and their fan base would sustain me for eons. But Teddy Bridgewater proved this season that this guy can still play freaking frackin' ball. Started 5 games for the Saints, went 5-0 when Drew Brees was out of commission. So during the season, went 133 for 196, completing 67.9% of his completions, 1,384 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions at only 27 years old. He is by far the most accurate QB free agent that is actually within the Packers price line, because we're not talking about Tom Brady, and we ain't talking about Phillip Rivers, even though I would say Teddy Bridgewater is probably more accurate than Phillip Rivers at this point. So for me, I think that he's going to cost a good amount of money. And I think the fact that he showed that he could still play ball, he should be a starter somewhere, or at least be given an opportunity to do so. Now, the last full season that he's actually played was back in 2015, 292 for 447, completing 65.3% of his passes, over 3,000 yards, 3,231, 14 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. So, Teddy Bridgewater, still a really young guy, showing that he still has the talent. And I think if the Packers can snag him for a cheap deal, why not? The question is, though, and I think the big question is that, yes, he would be a backup, but you got to think that Teddy Bridgewater wants to be a starter somewhere. And I think he's proven that he can, at least earning an opportunity. And so I got to think that whether it's 3, 4, 5 years down the line when Aaron Rodgers decides to finally hang it up, I don't think that Teddy Bridgewater is going to be like, yeah, sure, take your time. I'll start when I'm 31 years old. And so for me, I would love to get Teddy Bridgewater, but I think, 1, he's going to be too expensive, and 2, I just don't think he's going to be willing to wait that long. But in the interim, if there's not another team out there willing to give him a starter spot, I think you absolutely bring him in and have him compete for the backup job. Then our number 2 is a Marcus Mariota. Yep, the soon-to-be former Titans QB, sitting at 27 years old. Now, Mariota, good God, hailed as one of the top prospects coming out of college. And I mean, listen, the guy has gone through a fluctuation of coaches and coaching staffs, and this season, obviously, for him was horrendous. Getting pulled from the Broncos game, they threw in Ryan Tannehill, and looking at his 2019 stats, 95 for 160, not even completing 60% of his passes for a little over 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. So, wasn't able to really complete a ton of his passes. Really didn't look great out there. But, throughout his career, the stats aren't that bad. I mean, he's 1,110 for 1,765, completing 62.9% of his passes, over 13,000 yards, 76 touchdowns, 44 interceptions. Obviously, interceptions are a bit high. But you also look at it, again, Mariota also never really had a ton of weapons to throw to. And, with the emergence of Derrick Henry, they obviously are allowed to rely on that run game a bit. But all I'm saying is that Marcus Mariota about to hit that free market, and boy, oh boy, is he gonna be cheap. And he's another one. Give him a shot. Who cares? I mean, again, if you can sign him for a cheap deal, abso-frickin-frackin-lutely. Have him come into camp. I would feel more comfortable in having Marcus Mariota as my backup than Tim Boyle right now. Right? Because Mariota at least has some of that experience, and I think that he has that big playmaking ability with his legs, and the guy can play ball. Obviously, he has struggled. Obviously, he wasn't able to really, find his spot in Tennessee, and I think the Green Bay Packers would be a perfect position for him to land in, because, again, give him a chance to regain his confidence and see if he can still play. I'm all aboard the Marcus Mariota train. And then finally, the guy who's the most intriguing to me on this list, by far, is Josh Rosen. The story of Josh Rosen, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The kid is 23 years old, just turned 23 years old. He's played 2 seasons, like a season and a quarter at this point, and he's picked by the Cardinals. They hold on to him for a year with no offensive line, with no weapons beside Larry Fitzgerald. In 2018, 217 for 393, over 2,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. Not great numbers, but the guy is literally murdered on just about every single play as a Cardinal. The guy is sacked 45 times. 45 times with the Cardinals. That's pretty damn bad. He starts 3 games with the Dolphins and is sacked 16 times. Listen, you can talk about Fitzmagic all you want, but they had to pull some bunny out of the ass to keep him upright. There was a reason that the Dolphins didn't win a whole lot of games this year, even though they did beat the Patriots, so I love you. But, I mean, the guy really hasn't been given an opportunity. And in 2019, it wasn't great. 58 for 109 and 1 touchdown and, 5 interceptions. It's not good. But again, look at the weapons that the Dolphins have, or lack thereof. Devontae Parker finally decided, I'm going to be really good after being like a sleeper in fantasy for years. I think this is another guy who, he's not technically a free agent, but the Dolphins are going to give him up. Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to come back. They're most likely going to draft a QB of the future in the draft. And so Josh Rosen's going to be sitting at number 3. Let him go. You could probably get a late round pick and just send that on over to Miami, and boom, you got a guy that you can develop. I think that Josh Rosen, the fact that he's 23 years old and 2 years ago, he's literally drafted as the first pick in the NFL. Just go try it. Give it a shot. They're barely paying him over in Miami. Abso-frickin-frackin-lutely, you take him. See if the kid can compete and try him. And who knows, this is a guy that, if Rodgers decides to retire in 3 to 4 years, the guy will be 26, 27 years old. I'm just saying, why not? Now, we'll talk about looking at draft prospects of going to get a QB, because I would be very surprised if Goody doesn't pull the trigger on getting a QB. But for me, I mean, especially Mariota and Rosen, they make sense to me. They're going to be super duper cheap, and I think they have a lot of potential. At the bare minimum, at least competition for a backup. But that's my opinion. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Should the Packers go after a QB in free agency? Should they go after a QB in the draft? Should they go after a QB at all? Or should they just be like, Tom, inside linebacker all day? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy on all social media. See down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. And a big shout out and thank you to all the Patreon members at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.